I have always felt that it is incumbent upon Americans to really understand what is going on nationally and internationally to the best of our ability. And I'm very proud of our newspaper because it's a small, independently family-owned newspaper. So we get information that a lot of other people don't get. And people ask me, well, what was your motivation for writing the book? And I always say it was because I was following the events. But I probably was like the majority of Americans prior to 9/11. I really, things that happened in the Middle East, you know, glazed eyes, didn't know, didn't want to know, couldn't be bothered with. But when it came home to roost, then that's when I thought, I can no longer stick my head in the sand. I've got to know what's going on. And I started just investigating and looking, and all of a sudden we were going to war in Iraq, and they had all this oil, and it didn't make sense because that wasn't really where Al-Qaeda was. The other thing that Santa Fe is known for is we're home to a lot of retired CIA agents, and we have frequent town hall meetings and group discussions and lectures from these individuals who graciously give of their time and their information. So I would say that this particular community was much more knowledgeable about the fact that, you know, my father, who had moved away from Santa Fe but still subscribed to the newspaper online, said, there's no way Saddam Hussein got weapons of mass destruction. There's no way. We were watching him like a hawk. We were flying over. You know, he's just a big mouth. He himself said, this is insane that we're going to start this war. This isn't the right war, the right place, or the right time. And there were too few voices standing up against that. And I maintain that was, again, a backlash and fear of a media that would immediately paint you as being soft on terrorism, of painting you as being unpatriotic for not, you know, following lockstep. And so this, to me, was another huge abuse of the administration to take the trust and the faith of the American people. And one of the things that is of greatest interest to me is the war, the resolution to go to war in Iraq. Now, you know, the way that they did that was proactively in 2002. Bush went to the Congress and said, we want to have a loaded gun if we need it, basically. This is the way they did it.
A resolution to go to the United Nations.
Right, but well, the resolution to go to war said that it had three basic components to it.
It was to go to the United Nations first, and which it was never a resolution to go to war in October. And I have to say, Joe was one of the very few voices, as you point out, in the run-up to the war in late 2002 to speak out. Again, he very credible on this, but I'm biased, he's my husband, but when he spoke out, he was speaking in nuanced ways and serious ways, saying this is maybe not the best idea we've had for national security. But quickly, any voice that said, this isn't going to be a cakewalk, was quickly drowned out, saying, oh, you're unpatriotic, you're a traitor, step aside. But Joe was one of those few voices in that run-up to the war that said, maybe we should think about this or have more of a debate, a national debate on what this means. And here we are, 5 years later, still at war.
Well, and this is an interesting point. I want to go back in time to the first Gulf War in 1991, the run-up to that war. And I write about that as well in one of the very first chapters of the book, in terms of how the first Bush administration took very select information and, in fact, created a big hoopla on these, the Kuwaiti baby story about how Iraqis, when they first came into Kuwait, had gone into a Kuwaiti hospital, taken babies out of incubators and dropped them on the cold, hard cement floor, left to die, and then walked away. And it turned out that that was a story that was made up by somebody that was to benefit from, the Americans. Are you aware of that story, or do you?
No, I'm not of that specifically, but I will say the approach and the team that was in place during the first Gulf War was diametrically opposed to what happened in 2003. In the first Gulf War, the then President Bush, George H.W. Bush, put together truly a coalition. He and then Secretary of State James Baker, they were on the phone constantly, cajoling, bringing in people, and using the United Nations in what I think is in a much more positive way to have the support of the world, so that when we did ultimately invade Iraq, we really did enjoy the world's support, because that this violation of the Kuwaiti border. I'm not denying that there were, of course, stories that were exaggerations and manufactured completely. But the way the run-up to the war was conducted, I mean, and it was different circumstances as well, was quite different from what we saw in 2003.
Well, the research that I did on the first Gulf War was that Saddam Hussein had for years threatened to take Kuwait back as his 13th state. It wasn't a new thing. That he had engaged in atrocities against his own people, and that the Reagan administration had turned a blind eye to that and had actually threatened to veto any sanctions that had been passed in the House of Representatives by the Democrats to sanction Saddam Hussein in 1988 prior to his leaving, saying that Saddam Hussein would respond better to a carrot than he would to a stick. And so the previous kind of Republican administration under Ronald Reagan had kind of allowed for this behavior of Saddam Hussein. And in fact, April Galipsky, the ambassador there prior to Joe's being there, had actually greenlighted the invasion by telling Saddam Hussein, we have no opinion on Arab to Arab.
I've heard Joe speak on this, so I can interject. April Glaspie, the ambassador, was using what was recognized to be diplomatic language that we don't take any position exactly on, but it was never a wink, a nod. It's an okay, not at all. They were told in very clear terms that an invasion was not of Kuwait was not going to be tolerated.
But we have the transcripts. There was a transcripts of that meeting.
Have Joe on, because he was there and he's much better versed in this.
After she
then
left,
and then Joe
2 weeks
was
later.
the acting ambassador when the invasion occurred, and April remained in Washington, and Joe continued on at the embassy.
But this was the thing about Saddam Hussein, is that he had, through the years, if you take a look at the historical record, he had received a lot of conflicting messages from the U.S. Yes, we're going to slap your hand. No, we're not going to. A lot of verbal threats, but nothing happening. So I think we have to take a look at our complicity in what happened in the first Gulf War.